Hello and welcome to this CNBC Africa Highlight Special. I am Kenneth Igbomor. As you can see, we're at the 52nd annual meetings of the Africa Development Bank, where the focus this year is on transforming agriculture for wealth creation.
This year's annual meeting is looking to tap into the experience of India's Green Revolution, a period where the country leveraged on technology to achieve improved yields in agriculture and was able to turn the tables and feed itself in a short space of 10 years.
We are all pleased to be here in this beautiful city of Ahmedabad, the home of Mahatma Gandhi, the land of vibrant Gujarat. Its uniqueness lies beyond being a smart mega city. It's based on its being the center of Indian independence. The famous Salt March and the Quit India movements that led to independence in 1947 were held right there in Ahmedabad. So from right here, through this annual meeting, will arise a new spirit of renewal and determination for Africa's accelerated growth and development. Let me thank you, Prime Minister Modi, for hosting this meeting, and the Minister of Finance, Arun Jaitley, and your staffs, and of course the bank staff as well, for your excellent efforts. I know it's hot out here, but I can tell you that the warm hospitality that you've given us even beats the heat.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today in the state of Gujarat. The Gujarati flair for business is well known. Gujaratis are also famous for their love of Africa.
We are indeed privileged and honored to host the 52nd annual meeting of the African Development Bank. Leaders in this room today represent the voice and aspirations of 1/3 of humanity. I'm sure that this event will build on the success of the 3rd summit of the India-Africa Forum held in 2015 and will further cement the relationship between India and the countries of the African continent.
Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, I now have a great pleasure in officially declaring the annual meetings of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank Group open. Thank you.
This year's theme, Transforming Agriculture for Wealth Creation in Africa, is building on the Feed Africa drive, a strategy that plans to stretch outcomes in agriculture beyond growth and cover more complex issues such as food security, inclusive growth, and improved resilience to climate variability. Feed Africa is just one part of a 5-pronged strategy called the High Fives.
African Development Bank has the High Five strategy, as you know, as its principal core purpose for being. The first part of the core strategy is basically to light up Africa, Power Africa. Africa is in a very unique situation. 645 million Africans are without power. About 30 countries have inconsistent power, lots of power outages, as you know. So the objective of the first of our High Fives is to make sure that by 2025, all Africans have universal access to power. We're investing about $1.2 billion a year for that purpose.
This requires new capacity installation in generation of about 160 gigawatt. And it requires to connect the 205 million households. And the strategy plans for connectivity via off-grid, 130 million households, and 75 million households via the off-grid, using the new off-grid technologies, which can be also competitive.
The second High Five is Feed Africa. Now, again, we're dealing with a real challenge. Africa imports about $35 billion a year worth of foodstuffs, which is very, very unfortunate because Africa is the continent which still has about 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable land available. And so for Africa at this point not to be able to feed itself is just something that, as the premier development bank on the continent, that we have a mandate to correct. And we're investing about $1.2 billion a year towards that objective.
First of all, moving up the value chain, there's many things that Africa does right now in terms of growing basic crops that can really provide excellent opportunities in terms of higher value added, so that's higher revenue, but also jobs. We know that the low-cost manufacturing jobs are not coming to Africa, at least not en masse. So really, if you look at the transformation that Africa is going to need to do in terms of development, it's going to be via agribusiness. And that's something that we're really trying to harness, and we have a number of programs around that. We are in India, and we knew that India was able to do it. We're going to see a green revolution in Africa. I'm convinced of that. Everything's coming together in order to do it. We have to face a few big challenges right now, like the famine situation that we're seeing particularly in East Africa and parts of northern Nigeria, for example. But we're confronting that. And going forward, definitely. I think right now we're saying that our strategy is Feed Africa, but in reality it's about Africa feeding the world.
If African governments can just make sure they can feed themselves, they can have better macroeconomic and fiscal stability. And I think the message is getting to ministers of finance, because agriculture used to be left for ministers of agriculture. But now people realize that what you do with agriculture is critical for jobs, it's critical for foreign exchange earnings, it's critical for also how you conserve the amount of imports that you have to stabilize your economy. It's also critical to how you actually lower inflation. So agriculture is about the economy. I'm delighted with the responses we are getting from presidents investing in agriculture. I'm even more excited about the private sector finally seeing agriculture's time is come. Let's make agriculture a business that thrives in Africa.
Besides championing Africa's drive to feed itself, another crucial part of the AFDB's 52nd annual meeting was the launch of the Africa Economic Outlook for 2017, a joint effort of the African Development Bank, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and the United Nations Development Programme. The Outlook projects growth on the continent to rebound by 3.4% this year if the recovery in commodity prices is sustained. A further consolidation of 4.3% is expected in 2018.
The African Economic Outlook that we launched in this occasion started in 2001, and it has grown in stature, relevance, and also significance across the continent.
It's a factual-based publication that everybody waits for it every year. It has 3 parts, I think. The first part, which is on the usual story of macroeconomic policy, trade, and others. Second part on thematic, and then the fourth part, the third part is on country briefs.
Well, if you look at the points that they're raising, even though Africa's growth rate was 2.2% in the aggregate, but it's projected to rise to 3.4% this year. Well, next year it's supposed to rebound for about 4.3%. That's very, very important, that Africa's head is actually above the waters.
So we need to interrogate what is the quality of that growth. And this is what I had always said for many years, that we are growing, but the quality of the growth has to improve. You still have to grow. Good growth is better than no growth, but quality growth, what does that mean? Just what we are talking about. Are we growing in agriculture where we are creating more jobs? Are we growing our manufacturing sectors? Are we even growing our services, where our youth who are coming out of universities can also be gainfully employed?
I think we must pay attention to this issue of the skills for young people. The population of Africa's youth today, which is roughly about 480 million people, will rise to another 840 million people by 2050. And that's going to make Africa the youngest continent, if you wish.
And if we have to transform our economy, the only way is to go through this industrialization process. And I think some of the countries are probably getting there. Very soon we will be looking at success stories in the continent, countries like Ethiopia, like Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, even the old ones like South Africa, Mauritius, Botswana are moving in that direction.
Very critical for Africa in the sense that Africa has agriculture. That's what this annual meeting is about. Africa has agriculture. But the key is as he said, to move to commodity-based industrialization, move to the top of the value chain for rice, for cassava, for cocoa, for coffee, for things that Africa produces. It should not be at the bottom of the value chain. It has to be at the top of the value chains. So all in all, I think that the prospects for Africa look very good.
To achieve the high five targets, Africa will require the right partnerships and strong political will from its leadership.
If there's anything that I want to say to African leaders is that bring down the walls, bring down all the walls. Africa should be one real integrated market, vibrant market. We must be able to feel at home in every part of Africa. Nations are where you're born. That's where you're born. But Africa is where you belong to. So we must be able to move around and invest freely all across this continent.
We
have an excellent relationship with the African Development Bank, and I must congratulate the President, the entire staff and board of directors of the bank accompanying Africa in those priorities. You know, when we are partners, we should be speaking the same language, and as such, Africa's priorities should be the same as the priorities of its partners. The ADB is along these dynamics, and from Ahmedabad, where I am currently, let me make this appeal for the capacity building of the African Development Bank for recapitalization, so that African countries can take ownership, and also the non-regionals can also beef up the bank's capacity, so that our development challenges are met.
You know, Africa is a massive net food importer, and it really should be able to feed itself. That was something that Bill and Melinda Gates, my two bosses, wrote about in an annual letter a couple of years back, saying they were optimistic Africa could feed itself by 2030. And we think there's just enormous potential for this, both as an economic engine for growth, but also as a poverty alleviation tool. There's frankly no better tool to bring people out of poverty than big investments in agriculture.
You may ask, why India? During the third India-Africa Forum in 2015, India offered $10 billion for development projects in Africa over the next 5 years. Trade between India and Africa has also improved, with India topping the United States with regards to trade with Africa in 2016.
India has many examples that Africa can learn from in agriculture, appropriate technology, innovation, you know, information technology, and so many and so forth. Over the years, Africa and India have had a strong bond and a strong partnership, and I'm happy that under the current Prime Minister Modi, that partnership is being expanded. We were here about a year plus ago, and he launched a major initiative in solar power. And many of our countries have signed up to that initiative, and so it's our hope that we'll be able to see the deployment of more solar across the continent. Earlier, we had partnered with India in terms of spreading information and communications technology across Africa through using the African Union as the conduit, and I think that has been highly successful.
Africa is approaching an exciting time. India and Africa should navigate through this journey together and shape their common future. India's development partnership is based on the principles of South-South cooperation and voluntary partnership. It is demand-driven and devoid of any conditionalities. We leave it to our partners to decide their priorities. These are very cornerstones of our policy, and we believe that this is the most enduring model of taking a partnership forward.
Friends, let me conclude by wishing you a very successful and productive annual meeting. In the sports arena, India cannot compete with Africa in long-distance running. But I can assure you that India will always stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, supporting you in the long and difficult race for a better future.
As you heard from India's Prime Minister, the relationship between India and Africa has come a long way. But how can we take this to the next level? After the break, we'll look at deals, partnerships, and what to expect from next year's annual meetings. If Africa is going to leapfrog and transform its agriculture, then women will have to play a critical role in this mix. Let's look at deals that will foster the growth of women in agriculture.
The African Development Bank estimates that the financing gap for African businesswomen is as big as $42 billion, of which $16 billion is lacking for women in agriculture. A memorandum of understanding was signed between the African Development Bank Group and the International Finance Corporation to promote women-targeted investments in Africa.
IC signed an MOU with the African Bank. The goal of the MOU is to support the African Bank's affirmative action to finance women in agriculture initiative. This is the initiative President Adesina of the African Bank launched at last year's annual meeting with a goal of raising $3 billion specifically to support women entrepreneurs and smallholder farmers in agribusiness.
Many other deals were signed on the sidelines of these 5-day annual meetings. The government of Rwanda and India's Export-Import Bank signed a financing agreement worth $81 million to support vocational training and the establishment of business incubation centers.
Yesterday we signed an agreement for a loan with Exim Bank of $81 million on education, on technical and vocational training education already. Yesterday it was signed. So that's just the beginning. They are also coming in for energy, and also they are coming in for road construction. We already have had these discussions. The rest is to prepare the documents so that we can sign.
Also on the sidelines of the meetings was the launch of the Indo-Japan initiative called the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. This initiative aims to develop quality infrastructure in Africa and support growth of innovative technology between Asia and Africa.
I totally agree with I5, yes. And we've been discussing very closely, at least since 10 years ago, starting 2007, when we concluded for the first time MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. And we have launched several important initiatives. The latest one is EPSA, enhancing private sector assistance in the occasion of TCAD 6, August 26. There we launched $3.3 billion financial and technical support, including sovereign loan, non-sovereign loan, and technical cooperation to private sectors. In the course of those, launching initiatives, we fundamentally agreed with the direction of African development. Yeah.
Now we have prioritized almost 3 sectors. One is infrastructure building. So we do have many Japanese companies have the good talent and the technology. But unfortunately, currently it's not fully introduced in Africa. So we are trying to invite to the Japanese infrastructure and the construction company doing a business in Africa. Second is healthcare and medical equipment. And in that field, also Japanese company enjoy the very high level of the technology. So, and also we can find is a big demand situated in Africa. And they, in my observation, they enjoyed a good business result from that field. And the third one is, if possible, agriculture. And Japan itself is also suffering is agriculture underdevelopment in the standard of the developed country. So that we must do more as R&D activity in agriculture. So from that point of view, we try to find is a business opportunity in the African continent.
As the meetings drew to a close, the president of the African Development Bank hosted a closing press conference which opened up the opportunity for me to ask a question about the role of research in achieving the High Five goals.
Thanks very much for the questions. On the issue of research and what's the African Development Bank are doing, the technologies to feed Africa are already there. The question is how to take those technologies to scale, to reach tens of millions of farmers. That's the issue. Let me give you some examples of the technologies that are there. That's what they call new rice for Africa. It's called Nerika rice. It allows you to get yields that are probably about 4 times what farmers are currently getting. And they give you great quality in terms of grain quality for the rice. When I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, we pushed those technologies for rice. And we reached 6 million farmers in 4 years with those rice varieties. They are there. Cassava. We have today in Africa cassava varieties that can give you up to 80 tons per hectare. Take bananas. Tissue culture bananas can give you over 40 tons per hectare. You look at maize. We have water-efficient maize, drought-tolerant maize that can produce a lot of, that will give you a good crop even in the face of drought. And we have also lots of other technologies, whether it's in fish or animal sides. So the point is, the challenge is not whether we want to do more research. Of course, you can do more research. My priority is how do we take what we have to scale.
After the closing press conference, we trailed the president of the African Development Bank to the unveiling of the city to host the annual meetings next year.
Thank you very much, Madam Governor. Thank you for the introduction. We are so delighted that we are going to be going to Busan for the 53rd annual meetings of the African Development Bank. You know, I love South Korea. You know, it's quite a country in terms of what they have done. You know, you look at Seoul, it used to be just the Hanan River. That was all. It was a fishing village. You know, way back in the 1960s, you found that the per capita income of South Korea was much below that of sub-Saharan Africa. But you look at it today, the per capita income of South Korea is well over $27,300 or $27,300 per person. That's a remarkable thing. And what they've done was not a miracle. It came out of real political will. It came out of entrepreneurship and dynamism of the people of South Korea. And it also came on the part of self-sacrifice by the people of South Korea. Let me just finish by saying, Kamsa Hamnida.
I spoke to the head of the Korea delegation, Ji Yong Choi, to find out what their plans are for next year's meetings.
I-5 is emphasized the importance of industrialized Africa. Korea has some history of the industrialize our economy within a short period of time. So we would like to share our experience with other African countries. Based on our experience, some clear leadership and clear policy from the government has been a key success factor. So we're going to share our experience with other African countries through the trust fund capacity building and some technical assistance to African countries.
It's been a wonderful time here in Ahmedabad, India, but as we leave with the good taste of India in our lips, but all roads next year will lead to Busan in South Korea. See you next year at the annual meetings of the African Development Bank. Take care.